Welcome to Eat Your Greens with Dr. Black, where I talk about all kinds of things, but especially how your diet and lifestyle affect your health. If you're a new listener, welcome. Thank you for spending a little bit of your precious time with me. If you're a returning listener, you know that this is where I have fun telling bad jokes and sharing a few facts and some trivia about something nutrition related or health and lifestyle related that caught my interest. Today's episode has been brewing in the back of my mind, where it has transformed from the raw idea into the final concept. It finally bubbled to the surface and it's ready for recording. I'm talking about fermented foods, and there's a lot to cover. Fermentation is older than written history and is basically the oldest food preservation trick in the book. It includes everything from cheese to kombucha, sauerkraut, miso, bread, soy sauce, pickles, and some other, shall we say, more interesting things. So, getting into our fun facts, what was the earliest fermented food? If you guessed beer, you'd be right. Archaeologists discovered a 13,000-year-old barley-based brew in what is now Israel. The ancient Egyptians were also masters of fermentation, and they made both a sourdough type of bread and beer. So it seems like this craft beer scene that we have going on now isn't quite as new as we think it is. Over in China, at around the year 7000 BCE, people were fermenting rice, honey, and fruit to make the world's first wines. So it seems like we have an idea of where humans' priorities lie. We're talking beer, wine, and bread. Now, fast forwarding to more modern times, fermentation hasn't just stuck around, it's become downright trendy. Think back to the quarantine phase of the pandemic. How many of you were obsessed with sourdough starters or kombucha brews? Now, being in healthcare, I had a somewhat different quarantine experience, so I didn't get to experience all of that, but I understand that it was all the rage. So what started out as an ancient survival tactic has now become an artisanal craft. Fermentation is basically nature's way of preserving food. Let's go to the biology lab, shall we? Fermentation works because beneficial microbes, generally either types of bacteria or yeast, transform sugars into one of two things, either alcohol in the case of beer and wine, or acid in the case of fermented food. This makes the food last longer while adding all kinds of different funky flavors. That's the most common word to use to describe the flavor of fermented food, funky. Now picture it. Back in the day, people were constantly finding clever ways to store food through the long winter or the dry season when they couldn't grow things, and fermentation became their secret hack. All right, let's break down the science of fermentation a little bit more in a way that's easy to digest, pun intended. So, how does it actually work? Let's say you're making bread or beer. Let's start with that. Yeast, which is a type of fungus, I know it sounds weird, but stay with me, is added to the mix. And yeast loves sugar. It's like candy to them. So they start munching on the sugars in your flour for your bread or in the grains that you used for the beer. And in the process, they release two things, alcohol and carbon dioxide. Now, in bread making, the carbon dioxide gas that's released creates those bubbles in the dough that makes it nice and fluffy. It rises. And then when you bake your dough into bread, the alcohol evaporates. So you don't have to worry. Your yummy sandwich on sourdough bread is not going to get you tipsy. You can still drive after eating sourdough bread. Now, beer, on the other hand, the alcohol sticks around, and that's why it can give you a buzz, and you should imbibe in moderation. Now, what about other foods like yogurt or maybe sauerkraut? In those cases, it's not yeast, but bacteria that are doing the work, and they don't make alcohol, they make types of acid instead. So, for example, in yogurt, the bacteria munch on the lactose, that's the sugar found in milk, and they turn it into lactic acid. That acid is what thickens the milk and gives yogurt its tangy flavor. With sauerkraut, we're starting with cabbage and the lactic acid producing bacteria that naturally live on the cabbage. Remember, vegetables are grown in the soil. They come with their own bacteria already present, and those bacteria use the glucose and fructose in the leaves of the cabbage as their energy source. And in the process of transforming the raw ingredients, which you started with, into that final fermented product, the bacteria multiply. So when we eat these fermented foods, not only are we benefiting from the nutrients in the food itself, but our gut health also benefits from the presence of those probiotic, that's health-promoting bacteria. So the cool part about all of this, fermentation isn't just changing the flavor. The acid and the alcohol that these little microbes help to produce are what's preserving the food. So it's like nature's way of saying, hey, we're not going to let this spoil too quickly. You can keep these things in the fridge, for much longer than actual, say, raw cabbage that's going to wilt or get moldy. So to sum it up, fermentation is like a magical transformation where microorganisms eat sugars and turn them into something new, whether it's a fizzy drink, a fluffy loaf of bread, or a jar of zesty pickles. And this is all thanks to the hard work of the bacteria and the yeast. Now, what about specific types of fermented food? Let's go back to that cabbage. The most common things made with cabbage are kimchi and sauerkraut, right? The Koreans and Germans have been fermenting cabbage for thousands of years, and they're turning something simple into a tangy probiotic powerhouse. Kimchi, that's that spicy Korean banchan or side dish. It is a fermented vegetable feast. It's been around for over 2,000 years, and it's often praised for its health benefits and complex flavors. Plus, it adds that spicy kick to keep things interesting. Sauerkraut, on the other hand, was known to be around since the time of the Roman Empire, and it's known for its high vitamin C content, which was crucial for sailors on long voyages. It helped to prevent scurvy. Now, cucumbers turn into pickles, right? We all know that. But we're not talking about the ones soaked in vinegar here that you find on the grocery store shelf. We're talking about the pickles found in the refrigerator section, and that's where that liquid in the pickles, the pickle juice, looks a little cloudy if you shake it up. The word pickle comes from the Dutch word pekkel, which means brine, and brine is basically salt water, and that's what you add to the pickles in the fermentation process. What about soybeans? Soybeans, usually we think of like the beans themselves, that's edamame or maybe soy milk or tofu. Now I'm doing an entire separate episode just focused on tofu, but these are non-fermented soy products. When we ferment soybeans, we get things like miso, as in miso soup or miso dressing at the Japanese restaurant, and tempeh. Tempeh comes in a little sort of block form, and it's a great protein alternative. Now, when I've had tempeh in restaurants, I really liked it. They can turn it into things like vegan bacon. I've seen it as like a barbecue rib, kind of like, short rib alternative, chicken wings, things like that. But when I've tried to make it at home, I haven't quite gotten it right. It's a little tricky and I'm still trying to figure it out, but I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep trying. One day I'm going to do an episode just about how I finally succeeded in making something with tempeh at home. But those are the things that you get when you ferment soybeans. I always like to mention the health benefits of whatever food I'm talking about, and fermented foods are no exception. We already talked about how they're packed with those probiotics, the healthy, friendly bacteria that help keep your gut healthy. And of course, we know that if you keep your gut bacteria healthy, they're going to help boost your immune system. They'll improve your mental health. They'll fight cancer, all the things that they do. It's all about these beneficial bacteria and their ability to interact with that gut-brain axis and regulate your immune system. So go back, revisit my episode on the microbiome. There's the one on fiber. You can get a nice refresher course on the importance of gut health, and fermented foods are a key part of that. Now, there's a downside to any type of food. Overconsumption of anything can be bad for you, and fermented foods are no exception. They are high in salt. And so that can actually not only raise your blood pressure, but it can increase your cancer risk. In fact, countries like Korea, other places where they eat a lot of fermented vegetables, and we're talking, Korea and Japan, they eat this stuff every single day with almost every meal, and they have very high rates of stomach cancer, and it's been attributed to the salt in the fermented vegetables. So don't overdo it. So let's circle back around to the sourdough bread. I talked a little bit about how fermentation works to make sour bread, but let's just explore a few more facts about it. We know that it gets that sort of tangy flavor from the fermentation process, and that the CO2, the carbon dioxide released by the yeast, is what makes it rise, and you get the bubbles in the bread, the little, spongy texture. And so sourdough bread has been around since ancient Egypt. It's basically bread royalty. During the baking process, those live yeast are killed off. So unlike the vegetables, you're not left with any kind of probiotic organism, but you are left with a bread that has distinctive health benefits that aren't found in conventionally made bread. So to begin with, sourdough bread has a lower glycemic index. And if you don't know about the glycemic index, that's a measure of how fast a food makes your blood sugar spike. And lower is better, right? We want a smoother blood sugar curve to help not only prevent, but if you already have diabetes, to reduce your insulin needs. So it can help prevent and also manage diabetes because of its lower glycemic index. Also, for reasons that I don't really understand and honestly didn't take the time to look up, there's something about the fermentation process that changes the gluten in the wheat flour that you use to make the bread. And so people who have gluten sensitivity often can tolerate sourdough bread, whereas they cannot tolerate regular bread. Now, I still do think people with actual celiac disease, right? That's the autoimmune disease where you get gut inflammation and other symptoms from gluten. That's a much more serious issue. And so people with actual celiac probably still need to use a lot of caution and may not be able to tolerate the sourdough bread. Some reports even suggest that the nutrients in sourdough bread, things like protein, iron, magnesium, zinc, and potassium, may be more bioavailable because of the fermentation process. Now, again, I didn't take time to look at the scientific studies to back up these claims, so take them with a grain, of salt. But that's what the sourdough bread aficionados are claiming on the internet. And if it's on the internet, must be true, right? All right, so now getting away from plant-based fermentation, let's talk about cheese, please. All cheeses are technically fermented, but not all of them still contain the live microbes. So a cheese that has been aged but not heated, things like mozzarella, cheddar, Swiss, and provolone, to name a few, still contain the live bacteria that ferment the lactose from the milk into the acid that basically curdles the milk and turns it into cheese. On the other hand, peasant-style cheeses, where you simmer the milk and then add an acid to separate out the curd from the whey, those are things like paneer and queso fresco. Those do not contain live organisms because it's been heated. And then, of course, there's pasteurized processed cheese, which in my book shouldn't even count as cheese. If you're somebody who still eats cheese as part of their diet, basically these should be avoided, as they are a highly processed food with tons of additives like emulsifiers and food dyes and all these other things. Are basically terrible for your health. So processed, pasteurized cheese-like product, just avoid altogether. Last, we're going to move into what I'm calling the gross zone, and that's where people in various cultures have tried to preserve meat or animals using fermentation. And basically, there's a whole world of fermented food out there beyond sauerkraut and kimchi. In China, there's something called century eggs. So they're also called 100-year eggs or sometimes 1,000-year eggs. They are preserved eggs that have been fermented in a mixture of clay, ash, and quick lime for several months. And this results in a dark, almost black egg with a deep green yolk. And they're prized in Chinese cuisine for their unique texture and taste. I'm not sure what unique is, but I'll probably pass. Something else that I'm going to mispronounce, so forgive me if you're Swedish, and I'm just going to pronounce these the way they're spelled. Surströmming. It's a Swedish delicacy, often cited as one of the smelliest foods in the world. If you think that things like blue cheese and Roquefort are stinky, I think this has them beat by about 1,000 times. So it's fermented herring fish that's been packed into cans and allowed to ferment for months. And it has apparently, reports say, this pungent aroma that could even clear a room. But if you're brave enough, it's a unique taste of Scandinavian tradition. Moving over to Greenland, they have hakarl. This is a fermented Greenland shark. It's buried in the ground for several months before being hung up to dry. And reports say that it's a bit like eating funky old cheese, but the flavor has been described as ammonia sweet. So sounds like an acquired taste to me. And Kasu martsu. This is a Sardinian cheese that is also known as maggot cheese. Yes, I said maggots. It's fermented with live larvae of cheese flies, and then the larvae break down the cheese, making it apparently really soft and creamy. Most of the time, those maggots are removed before eating, but, some aficionados enjoy that extra bit of, protein, whatever, not for the faint of heart. And then the very last one is kiviak, a traditional Greenland dish. So going back to Greenland, this involves fermenting a small bird called an auk inside the hollowed out body of a seal. In the South, we have turducken, where you cook a chicken inside a duck inside a turkey. Well, in Greenland, they have, what would you call that? Auk seal, a auk fermented inside the hollowed out body of a seal. So those birds are tightly packed in. They're left for several months. And then when it's time to eat the birds, they're consumed whole, feathers and all. I would love to go visit Greenland sometime, but I think I will have to pass on that one. Okay, that's it for this episode. I hope I haven't soured you on the idea of fermented food. My goal is always to produce a highly cultured show that's not too cheesy. If you enjoyed it, please do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button on whatever app you're using to listen. Give me a 5-star rating, leave a review, do all the things. And don't forget, if you haven't already done so, you can go to my website, eatgreenswithdrblack.com. Scroll to the bottom of the page, subscribe, and you'll get an email whenever I release a new episode. So, thanks for listening, and don't forget to eat your greens.